We're standing before the professed house that was built after 1599. On this location was the house built in 1544, and then that house was destroyed in the Great Flood of Christmas Eve 1598. Inside this building are the rooms of St. Ignatius, and you can visit these rooms on Monday through Saturday from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and on Sunday mornings from 10 until noon. And they're directly facing the Gesù church to the right. When the Society of Jesus was founded on September 27, 1540, Ignatius's original intention for ministries was to preach, to teach, and here we see a man teaching, or a Jesuit here, teaching young boys catechism, and that stick wasn't to beat them, it was to go out and touch them and to call on them so that they knew their catechism. And here we see a man hearing confessions, and then the distribution of the sacrament. And those were sort of the primary ministries of the Society of Jesus until the late 1540s, and when Ignatius then saw the emphasis of his ministries on education. This is an enlargement of a map drawn by Antonio Tempesta that was done in 1593. And it's interesting because it shows some Jesuit buildings and then the location of some Jesuit buildings. So you see right here where it says T Societatis Jesu, that stands for Temple of the Society of Jesus, or Church of the Society of Jesus, and this is the Gesù. And it's the way it is today. But if you look next door to this building, that's the professed house that Ignatius lived in that was built in 1544, and it got destroyed in the Christmas Eve flood of 1598. So we still see the 1544 house here, but what we don't see is the Church of Santa Maria della Strada. So Santa Maria della Strada actually faced here as well, and then this was the professed house. But that church got destroyed when they built this church in the 1580s. Now if we look over here, we see where it says Collegium Societatis Jesu. This is the Roman College here, you see. But if we look over here, we see this large area over here, and that will be the area where they will build the Church of St. Ignatius. Now, if you look very carefully right here, you'll see the facade of another church, and that's the facade of the Annunciata. Now, all this property over here, including this here, was owned by the Countess della Tolfa, the wife of Camillo Orsini, and she was the niece of Pope Paul IV. And she gave this property, including this church, to the Jesuits. And then when Ignatius was canonized in the 17th century, then they bought this property here and they built the Church of St. Ignatius. You can see this obelisk here. This obelisk got moved where it is today in front of the Pantheon. We're now going to visit the rooms of St. Ignatius of Loyola in the house that he lived in beginning in 1544 and died in these rooms on July 31st, 1556. A little something about the rooms we're about to visit. This house was built under the supervision of Father Codaccio, the first Italian Jesuit, and it was completed in 1544, and the community then, those living in Rome, moved into this house. It wasn't much of a house, and in 1598, there was a horrible flood on Christmas Eve, and it destroyed the foundations of the house, and the house had to be destroyed. So how is it that we can visit the rooms of St. Ignatius? Well, Father Acquaviva, who was Superior General of the time in 1598, did something that was quite incredible. He realized that he was dealing with the rooms of St. Ignatius, something that was very, very important. These were the rooms where the constitutions were written, where several general congregations were held, and he wanted to preserve them. So what he did was, they had the builders build a wooden shell around the entire apartment of Ignatius, the 4 small rooms of Ignatius, put this wooden shell on stilts, and they built the new residence around the building. So the rooms are actually the authentic rooms of St. Ignatius from the house built in 1544, and they're encased in the new building built between 1599 and 1604. So we're visiting the rooms of St. Ignatius, but to do so, we had to enter into a building that was begun around 1600. Before you enter into the rooms of St. Ignatius, you enter into this beautifully decorated corridor painted by Brother Andrea Pozzo, the famous Jesuit brother who did illusionistic painting here in Rome and other parts of Italy. And he came to Rome in September of 1681. Now remember, I said that the rooms are the original rooms, but they were encased in a building that was built around 1600. Well, when they encased the rooms and then they built the house, this current house around it, they had some extra space. And so they had this corridor. Well, starting in 1681, Andrea Pozzo painted this incredible corridor. And Andrea Pozzo is famous for his work in perspective and illusion. Point out one thing. At the end of the corridor, you see 2 angels that are looking at those people who enter the room. Let's stop now and look at how those angels are from a frontal view. Looking at these angels from a frontal view, they look distended and misshapen. But that's not the view you're supposed to look at them. You would enter in through the door and then turn into the rooms, and so you really wouldn't see them from this angle. But this was part of the craft that Andrea Pozzo was so famous for, was the ability to create the illusion of perspective. This room has many illusions like we saw with the 2 angels. I'd like to point out one other illusion. Look directly above me, and you'll see one of the arches here, one of the ceiling decorations that's seen as a straight line. Let's look at it when we look directly underneath it. Standing directly under that painted arch, you can see that it's curved, but that certainly isn't the way it looked at the other end of the room. This is part of the tremendous skill that Andrea Pozzo demonstrated throughout this room and in churches throughout Rome and Italy. As they say here in Italy, a good story is worth telling, even though it may not be completely true. So there's a story behind this painting here in the Pozzo corridor, and those people who come here look at it and wonder why in this corridor where there's so many scenes of miracles and actions of St. Ignatius, why is there one of him playing billiards? Well, the story is this, that Ignatius went to dinner at the house of the Viceroy of Spain, and afterwards the Viceroy invited him to a game of pool. And Ignatius said, well, no game of pool is good without a little bet on the table. And the Viceroy kind of thought, well, geez, what does this guy have to bet with? So Ignatius said, I have a suggestion. If you win, I'll do anything you want for 30 days. And if I win, you have to do anything I want for 30 days. Of course, what the Viceroy forgot was that he was playing pool with Ignatius the courtier. And of course, Ignatius won. And 30 days, of course, he made the Viceroy of Spain. He requested of him to make the spiritual exercises. When you walk into these rooms, the first thing that greets you is a painting by de Ribera, painted in 1622, of Ignatius writing the Constitutions. Now, we didn't write the Constitutions in this room, but I always imagine this scene of someone walking into the room and St. Ignatius looking up to see who it was. Ignatius received official approval for the spiritual exercises on July 31st, 1548, and he considered it one of the most important gifts from the church, was this official approval of the spiritual exercises. So over in this glass case here, we have one of the first editions of those exercises. This was the bedroom and office of Ignatius. And for me, this is an absolutely incredible place, because the man who dreamed of going to the Holy Land, dreamed of going to the various missions, basically lived and worked in this room from 1544 until he died in 1556. We have over 7,000 letters of St. Ignatius. We have more letters of Ignatius than we do of Queen Elizabeth, Erasmus, Pope Paul III, Henry VIII. We have 7,000 letters, and this is before typewriters or computers, that Ignatius had to dictate and write all these letters. And he did it from that desk. These three pieces of furniture here, these two chests, and this desk were in the apartment where Ignatius stored the little clothing that he had and then most of his papers. Perhaps most important of all is this painting of the Madonna and Child that was over the desk, and it's known in Jesuit lore as the Madonna of the desk. And this painting is what Ignatius would have looked at when he wrote all these letters. The chair you see here was not from Ignatius's time, it was from the third superior general of the order, St. Francis Borgia. During his lifetime, Ignatius never wanted a painting done of him. So when he died, they had a clay mask made of his face, and from that mask, there were paintings made of him. This bronze cast is made from that death mask. The original clay mask is kept in the archives of the Society of Jesus, but this is a bronze cast made from that mask. And we know how tall Ignatius was because we have one of his cassocks, one of the gowns that he wore. And so we know from the length of that this was his height. Ignatius considered the Jesuits to be men of the exercises. But how they specifically lived out that life of the exercises was articulated in the constitutions of the Society of Jesus. These constitutions Ignatius worked on from about 1544 until his death in 1556, and they were officially approved in the First General Congregation in 1558. And in the room here, we have one of the first printed editions of the Constitutions of the Society of Jesus. Next to the printed edition of the Constitutions, we see a photocopy of what's known as the autograph of the Constitutions. Now, the main part of this writing was not done in Ignatius's hand, but we see side notes, and those were in Ignatius's hand. So we know that this was the copy that he approved. This case holds two important artifacts. In the upper left-hand corner is the seal of Ignatius, and the seal would be used on all his correspondence. The letter is signed by Ignatius, but it was probably written by someone else, and it says, Io Ignazio de Loyola, prepositare generale della Compagnia del Gesù, in nome mio e di tutti la congregazione de questa casa nostra de Roma. It's interesting, the use of the word congregation also could mean company, or the company of Jesus. And we see here in the lower right-hand corner of the paper his name, Ignazio. At the time of Ignatius, this was used as a meeting room and was used as a chapel where Ignatius would say Mass. And it was here that he died on the morning of July 31st, 1556. I can't help think that it was a coincidence that he died 8 years to the day of July 31st, 1548, the day that Paul III gave official approval to the spiritual exercises. If you visit the rooms of St. Ignatius, you can actually see a plaque on the floor that says, Hic obit Pater Ignatius. Here died Father Ignatius on July 31st, 1556. This painting of the Holy Family and John the Baptist was over the altar where Ignatius would say Mass in this room. (1990) and 1991 marked two important anniversaries. The 450th birth of Ignatius and the 400th anniversary of the founding of the Society of Jesus. In anticipation of this great event, Tom Lucas in the California province thought it would be a good idea to restore these rooms. Before that, they were decorated in what would be called Victorian splendor, and it was Tom's suggestion that they return more to their original way that Ignatius would have seen them. One of the discoveries of this restoration was this beautiful IHS. It probably was not contemporary with the time of Ignatius, but it was certainly painted soon after his death. This room that's immediately off the chapel was the room of Juan Pablo Burrell, a Spanish brother who was Ignatius's assistant during the last years of his life. And I'm standing in front of the chasuble that Ignatius wore, that they buried Ignatius in 1556. And you're wondering, well, what's it doing here? Well, when he was beatified, they re-exhumed the body, they redressed it, fixed it up a little bit, and they kept this chasuble. These are the slippers or shoes of St. Ignatius. And you can see they're not very fancy. And you can also see the sides are worn out there. That's where pious pilgrims took little pieces of them home for souvenirs. This is a cassock that we have of St. Ignatius, and this is how we know how tall he was, from shoulders to ground. This glass case contains the first edition of a biography written by Pietro Ribinera, of a biography of St. Ignatius written in 1587. And then the smaller book here is a copy of some house rules of Ignatius, first composed in 1549. This case contains two artifacts. One is the Mass in honor of St. Ignatius after he was canonized, and then a collection, a first edition collection of various documents written by St. Ignatius.